Maureen, thank you very much. Brandon, thank you very much for the invitation to speak. My presentation today is titled, What Does Good Look Like? Because we often hear a lot about the elements of actually what is design or design thinking or designer strategy. But actually, what does it all look like as a designer would actually visualize a future? But it's actually not my visualization. It's actually embedded in actually the thoughts of actually a lot of companies we've worked with. And actually some really deep thinking. To actually put a framework together that's going to hopefully challenge you to say, how does your organisation live up to what good looks like if we're saying we're a design-led company? What does it mean? A bit about myself, as Maureen said, I'm actually now with UTS, which is a really wonderful place to be because it's a university who actually has the right fundamentals of understanding the value of design. Got great design skills, but it's actually more than that. It's actually design as a driver of change. And how do we get that thinking happen? And likewise, it's AIDEN, the Australian Design Integration Network. It brings together a whole heap of threads of actually the activities that's happening in Australia. So we've actually got one voice. We can actually start to say, you know what, Australia's actually doing some great work here. Sometimes we're actually not good at communicating it, but we're actually putting it back together. So I'm setting the context for these speakers this afternoon, for the three CEOs. But I just wanted to give you back a bit of context. So Australia has a great innovation history. Companies like Cochlear and this project I worked with many years ago. Lots of design awards, as experienced on the dinner on Wednesday night. We have some great design capability in this country. But often, and I'm an industrial designer myself, often to get a good product to market inside an organisation is out of sheer fighting, desperation, getting your actual ideas heard inside a company. It's exhausting. You have to actually get your ideas out there. Those companies that do, it's great. They've got good fundamentals. What I'm interested in how do you make the conditions that good design can flourish in Australia? What's the actual conditions of the organisation to allow that to happen? And that's what I actually want to put forward today. So, for those of you who are in Australia, unless you've been under a rock, you've realised we've actually got this declining competitiveness, albeit in a manufacturing sector, but across a number of different sectors we're looking at. This is evidenced by large manufacturing closures and large industries that are actually shutting down constantly. The condition for the environment in Australia, or manufacturing in this environment, has changed significantly. At a national level, if you look at the World Competitiveness Index, that's actually done by the World Economic Forum, Australia's actually gone backwards in its global competitiveness now over a period of 3 to 4 years. Okay? This is actually a global ranking, and we're now ranked at number 21. But if you look at this, it's slightly different. They rank 140-odd countries, and they put them in the scale of actually these 12 pillars of what would define competitiveness. But you see up there, there's number 3. It's actually an innovation-driven economy. That's how Australia is ranked. It's ranked as an innovation-driven economy, and the last 2 pillars they look at, which is business sophistication and innovation, are the drivers which define our innovation economy. There's only 37 economies globally in that bracket. So we're actually 21 out of 37, and we're going backwards. As a nation, we need to do something, and it's everyone's problem to actually address it. So why? Why has these conditions actually changed? Essentially, this perfect storm has hit Australia. Okay, we've had this high or rising Australian dollar over a very short amount of time. We've got the declining terms of trade and record low productivity. It's those 3 conditions which actually have changed the Australian environment to go from a low-cost environment to a high-cost environment. Now, in doing that, you need to shift the way you innovate. You have to actually deal differently. A lot of businesses are still playing catch-up to this shift in the economic thinking. This isn't a condition that actually we've created, it's just been given to us, and we now must be agile to respond to it. So we turn to innovation. We talked about innovation. It's a hollow word, and it means lots of things to lots of people. Okay? And often, with all these different types of innovation, they're all valid. But it's actually the context in where you're innovating in, whether it be a low-cost environment or a high-cost environment, that you've actually got to change. So Australia being a high-cost environment, we have to move from a mindset where we've used to look at innovation in one way to an innovation that actually looks somewhere different. So how do other countries innovate in a high-cost environment? Again, this is a study done by the federal government a few years ago. And it's quite simple. It just looks at 2 metrics, whether you're exporting or you're domestic, or you're a radical innovator or incremental innovation. And if you look down there where Australia is, it's got a large band of green. We primarily innovate as an incremental innovation that's domestically focused. We have to. Our tyranny of distance has actually allowed us to do that. We focused internally. We've been protected with a low Australian dollar that allowed us exports to actually not come in and flood the market. But now the world's changed. And if you look at some of the other environments, such as Korea, Finland, and the Danish, Scandinavian countries, which have always been high cost, look at the way they innovate. Look at the portfolio of innovation that their companies actually have. They manage to actually remain relevant and remain competitive by having a spectrum of innovation. In Australia, we don't have that yet. And I believe fundamentally, when we talk about design and strategy, this is the problem we need to be addressing. So, governments, when you look at innovation in a low-cost environment, would turn to technological innovation. It's what we can do. We will actually invest in our sciences, we'll actually invest in new technologies embedded in capital equipment, which will actually drive productivity growth. But what we know in a high-cost environment, investment in non-technological innovation, those intangibles, such as business models, customer experiences, are just as important, if not more important, to actually drive growth in organisations. We don't do a lot of work in actually non-technological innovation. It's not something you see on a balance sheet a lot. It's easy to actually manage technological innovation. One of the reasons we actually haven't got this shift is this notion of management capabilities. Are our managers ready to actually take this challenge and shift from a technological focus to a non-technological focus? And what does this actually mean? So this comes into the world of design thinking. And we've spoken a bit about this today. And it's a critical skill set. And as someone, or Maureen said this morning, every one of us have the ability to be a design thinker as an innovation mindset. So if I look at this, where is Australia placed? It's another study done by a colleague of mine down at UTS, Professor Roy Green. And it was done with the London School of Economics, where they look at all OECD countries and the management performance. And I looked at Australia, and they looked at three key things: operational metrics, performance metrics, and people metrics. So Australia actually ranked okay across operations and performance. We're actually very good at lean innovation. We're very good at efficiency-driven innovation. Again, in a low-cost environment, that's what you need. You need to strip cost out of your organisation to actually, where you can actually get growth from that. Where Australia failed significantly is in this one metric in people, which is called instilling a talent mindset. We were unable, as a set of leaders or managers, to actually allow others to actually bring creativity into the workforce. Now, this is not a study that's actually a small sample. This is about 6,000 businesses, and it's actually quite significant. But it does show, I believe, the fundamental problem we need to be addressing. If our managers actually doesn't encourage creativity to actually come in the workplace, all the work of actually around good design or actually design and strategy will fail because we're not allowing it to actually flourish throughout the organisation. So design thinking gets talked about a lot. We had a good description before by the two previous presenters. And quite simply, it's not design as a noun, but design as a verb. It's a process. It's a process the designers follow. It's quite structured. And a lot of people talk about it, Roger Martin, from a reliable method to a valid method. Design's about validity. It's not one right answer, it's not repeatable, but the processes get to that point. And everyone can actually be a design thinker. It just shifts your mindset. And you have to move away from the very inductive to a very abductive thinking. But what's happened is we've had this huge mushrooming effect of actually design thinking courses, both in Australia and actually globally, whether it be 2-day courses, 3-day courses, a couple of week courses, MBAs actually implementing design thinking into their organisations, which is just wonderful. Really good as a personal inspiration to allow you to think differently, to allow you to actually empower and say, I can actually reframe problems and I can see the world in a different way. But it's more than thinking, and I can assure you, if you only put your staff on a design thinking program without changing the fundamentals, it's the best way to lose staff. Because they're going to be so frustrated when they come back into their organisations that they're not allowed to actually explore this mindset. They're not allowed to actually challenge and actually reframe and actually look at strategy. So design thinking by itself is not the answer. It's part of it, but it's actually much broader. So the US did studies, and again, this isn't just Australia's problem. There's a lot of nations are facing this. And this whole shift in perspective actually has to happen, again, when we look at high-cost environments. It's this shift from actually making things to making value. And Australia's been great at making things. It's what we do. We're actually, again, the tyranny of distance, we would solve it. New Zealand was exactly the same. We had to. But when you actually make value, it actually creates a different system inside the organisation. It requires a different set of strategic drivers and a different culture to allow that to happen. How do you actually then bring this into the organisation? How do you actually start to make value? So I was asked by the federal government with my colleague Peter King, who's in the audience, through the Australian Design Integration Network, to say, well, what does good look like? We hear about design in lots of ways, whether it be product development, but what's this designer strategy? How do we actually understand what design for manufacturing competitiveness might be? So I did a report for the government, which is about to be released, and here are some of the initial early findings from it. So first of all, I suppose you need to understand Australia is full of small business. Majority of actually small businesses within our economy. It's a backbone of our society where you actually see most jobs being created. Majority from actually not employing, you've got some small businesses and then some medium-sized businesses. But large is actually quite small. But herein lies the problem. So if we talk about micro multinationals, where's the real opportunity for actually growth in Australia inside of organisations? So if we compare this to the German Mittelstand, now these are companies that are very similar to your SME. There might be a family-owned business, 70-year-old. They're very good at actually a particular part of the value chain, and they've become world-class at it. If you look at the Mittelstand, they employ, there's quite a number of 16% of the business, but they deliver something like 50% of the value for Germany, okay, of total exports. If you look at Australia, Australia has a very small part of this Mittelstand, or these micro multinationals. So Australia, the way it's actually brought up, if you look at mining, which is our largest export, it's about 200 companies, 1% of the total workforce, brings out 50% of our total value. Look at SMEs, 80% of actually all employing deliver 5% of value. We've got a disconnect. So we've got a lot of room to actually grow our SME sector. Okay, but we need to grow them up into that Mittelstand type approach where they're actually understanding their value and how they become world best at that. So we went and found our Mittelstands. We went and found the micro multinationals, and you're going to hear from 3 of them this afternoon. Their stories of actually how they create value in this. And so we looked at companies that actually had either self-identified or we had identified as world-leading of using design as a strategic driver of value. And we looked at from Queensland through to Adelaide, various sized companies in different types of sectors. Some had done formal design programs, others hadn't. So the sector was in, Rossi Boots was TCF, Coden, electronics, Hagues, chocolates, IVR, construction, tool making, automotive, construction, tapware, electronics, Siebel is furniture, Superior Jetties Pontoons, Centaur you'll hear from, and RME and Gourmet Gardens you'll also hear from this afternoon. We went and actually interviewed them. We said, well, what does good look like? Why are you succeeding in the marketplace? They were all actual export winners. They were all good at something. We wanted to find out why. And we came up with this framework, which actually said, we referred to them as being design-led. They actually didn't use that language, but coming back to this, they fully agreed. So this came back into it. And it actually has these 3 key layers to it. It has this innovation focus, it has innovation activities, and it has an innovation mindset. I'll just walk you through it briefly. This innovation focus is critical. So these companies realise that they can't separate out value creation from value capture. Okay? You can't actually talk about we're going to deliver or make a widget and not able to actually put a service where you can actually monetize it from across the value chain. They see them as one and the same. It's critical. It sounds quite simple. But the number of firms who either, in the discussion this morning, I suppose, looked at that. Should we be making a box or should we be making the app? You need to actually lock those 2 together. That's how you get maximum value within that. And you look at all these companies, they put those 2 together. It's actually not spoken about separately. we can create value, but we can capture value, but the same people do both. They're not they're not different teams. So that's the first lens. But then they actually had these activities around their organisation, and they all demonstrated these qualities. And the first starting point was this clarity of purpose. They were so clear on what their why was, which you'll hear from a few of the speakers. That purpose that drove them, it wasn't a bit of strategy that sat in the desk of the CEO and actually never seen again. It wasn't something you did on a 3-day workshop as strategy. It was something the company believed in. And every single one in the organisation could actually repeat what that was. It didn't have to be overly complex. It was quite simple language to allow this to happen. They became their market. And again, it wasn't the marketing department, it wasn't the R&D department. It was everyone in the organisation had that opportunity to go and speak to a customer. And you start a conversation with a company. When was the last time you had a conversation with a customer? Oh, it's marketing's role. No, it's not. It's everyone's role in the organisation. We don't know how to do that. No, we can give you tools to do that. So it's just asking the right questions to frame it. The best I always see is when you get the CFO to actually have a customer interview. When they actually start to see firsthand why what they're signing off for makes sense. They become the disruptor. A lot of these companies were started off as technological drivers, and they saw that their market share was being eroded because they actually were being easily copied, or they were coming off patent or something, or they just couldn't keep up with the investments. So rather than actually look at a competitor analysis, how could we be something different? They became the disruptor themselves. They didn't look to their competitors to say, what are we going to do different? They actively disrupted themselves. They went out and said, as a designer would, let's look at alternative vision. Let's look at an alternative future. What can we do differently? Not that we should do it, but that we might do it. And how does that inform us? They integrated everything into the business model. That was the language of the organisation. Again, this wasn't R&D, this wasn't an accounts department. This was the language of the staff. They could talk about their business model rather than just the product or service they made, because business models automatically talk about value creation and value capture. Okay? And that final point was they own the change experience. Every SME, every business is busy. They often say, we're too busy. We don't have time for this. These are the companies who actually invested and allowed their staff to do it. They made sure it was actually part of their KPIs. They gave them time to actually do the training. They gave them time to actually be the disruptor. They gave them time to actually go into the market. So all these individual elements are not new at all. They're parts of an organisation you could see you might actually do. But when they all come together with that focus of value creation and value capture, they actually have some significant difference. But it's the third layer which is actually quite critical. What they did was their staff possessed these values. They were able to reframe problems. They were able to envisage new mindsets. They were encouraged to explore. They prototyped in everything they did, and they questioned and learned, so there was a flat hierarchy in this. But because you had a clarity of purpose, it didn't seem wasted. Because they were clear in their market, they could actually talk to their customers. They could explore in all the different things at a business model level or actually around. So they were very efficient in how they went about doing this. Prototyping made sense because, again, they had that clarity of purpose. They knew what they were prototyping against. They wasn't trying to second guess. And that questioning and learning, that was just encouraged. And the CEOs had to really actually, I suppose, and you'll hear from them, about that ability to be challenged. But it's actually not challenging the CEO or their thoughts, it's actually challenging the market's thoughts. So it's a different perspective you're actually bringing in. So if I look at this mindset, or these three dimensions, for me, this is actually what designer strategy is. We talk a lot about design thinking in isolation. We talk about this the bit in the middle a lot of the time as a strategic, coming from a business strategy. We want good purpose and business models. And then we talk about this value capturing, value creation as maybe a future sense of economic activity. But putting those three together, that's what designers do. And that's what is actually designing your business. You're putting all those elements as one. Once you get that, and you're going to hear from the three great CEOs of business who have done this, and they're the ones who are actually saying we're making a huge change. So What I think we need to do as a nation, and this is why I'm still at a university, I believe in capabilities. I think our first starting point is we have to address this capability gap. So to address this notion of declining competitiveness, we need a coordinated, integrated approach. We've got some great activities happening, but we need to make sure we're working towards this integrated effort of actually helping companies transform themselves rather than the individual pieces. So bringing in leadership programs, bringing in broader workforce skill development in design thinking and innovation, and that shift from actually products to business models. I believe then we've got a very resilient economy and a very resilient Australia. And I'm going to now hand it over to the CEOs to really unpack what that means in reality. Thank you very much.